On February 17, 2015, 3 schoolgirls from East London, Shamima Begum, Khadija Sultana, and Damira Abbasi, made the biggest decision of their lives. The girls aged 15 to 16 packed their bags, grabbed their passports, and boarded a flight to Istanbul without telling their families. From there, they traveled across the country until they got to the border and crossed into Syria. The girls had come to join ISIS. Their story is well known, but they weren't the only ones that came and joined ISIS. Over 41,000 foreign persons from at least 80 countries, including men, women, and minors that were taken there by their parents, traveled to Iraq and Syria, largely between 2013 and 2017, and became affiliated with ISIS. This was unprecedented. It was the largest mobilization of foreigners to a terrorist group in history. During the reign of terror, ISIS was responsible for horrific human rights violations. The brutal murder of civilians and prisoners under their control was theatrically staged, live-streamed, and spread around the world. And the group engaged in genocide and human slavery, particularly of Yazidi women and minors. They demonstrated cruelty that few of us could imagine. 4 years after Shamima and her friends traveled, ISIS has now physically been defeated, but at a significant cost. Men and women fought and died alongside each other on the front lines against them. The UN reported at least 30,000 people have been killed in this conflict. Local populations are now faced with rebuilding the social fabric and the physical infrastructure that this conflict have severely damaged. And the threat from ISIS is now evolving and remains a significant and long-term concern. Shamim is at an internally displaced persons camp in northeast Syria, alongside 8,000 foreign minors and 4,000 foreign women by local estimates. She's no longer a minor and has given birth to and lost Jara, her 3rd child. She wants to return to the UK, but still appears to support the ideology of ISIS and justify its actions. The UK government has stripped her of her citizenship, though this is still being challenged. I focus on the story of Shamima because it raises 3 important questions we're faced with today. Why do women, including girls, radicalize and join violent terrorist and extremist groups? Should they be able to return to their societies? And how do we prevent this from happening again in the future? The answer to these 3 interrelated questions have their basis in the same idea that I think is worth spreading. We have to be more effective and active in recognizing women as actors in terrorist and violent extremist groups, and more importantly, engaging and supporting women in all aspects of security. This matters for holistically understanding these groups and for how we can work to more effectively counter them today. This is a topic I've been researching since 2013, when I started examining this as part of my PhD in War Studies at King's College London, and have been focused on ever since. It's also one I've argued to bodies like the UN Security Council and governments around the world. So the first question is, why do women radicalize and join terrorist and violent extremist groups? Even though cases like Shamima may still appear to be exceptional, women have participated in political violence throughout history. From the German Red Army faction and the Italian Red Brigades to the Tamil Tigers and FARC in Colombia, women have represented up to 40% of members. Women have also been active in the far right, such as the KKK, or terrorist groups like National Action. Women's diverse and active roles in political violence should no longer be surprising, and many groups continue to directly reach out to women for support and membership today. Yet women's participation is still viewed as exceptional, of a lesser concern than the men who are in these groups. Women may seem to be manipulated to join these groups, and while this is true to differing degrees in some cases, it's certainly not the rule. Women also play diverse and active roles in these organizations. From leaders and militants to support and domestic actors, they demonstrate agency in diverse ways in these groups. They may find meaning and belonging in these groups, and in these diverse roles may help these groups achieve their aims and objectives. What would attract 3 young girls from a Western country to such an infamous terrorist organization? Research by me and Gina Vale at the International Center for the Study of Radicalisation demonstrated for the first time at least 4,761 foreign women joined ISIS from over 80 countries, the most in history. This had not been systematically analyzed until we did this research in 2018, demonstrating how little concern women in ISIS received. We believe this is still a vast underestimation due to the significant gaps in data that remain, which means we still don't fully understand the scope of the problem. Their motivations to join ISIS were as diverse as the women themselves. Academics generally look at why people join violent extremist and terrorist groups through what we call push and pull factors. That is, what were the unique factors in their life that pushed them out of their current position and made them seek out an alternative community and identity in a violent extremist group? When we talk about pull factors, these are the messages, tools, and incentives that terrorist groups use to pull or recruit somebody into their organization. Men and women often share very similar push and pull factors. When we look at push factors for women that joined ISIS, some expressed feelings of discrimination and of not belonging in their home country. Some were attracted by the ideology ISIS put forward, and others wanted to participate in or support their violence. Some were frustrated by the domestic and foreign policy of their government and had political grievances. For pull factors, ISIS tried to show it could offer services similar to that of a state, including healthcare and education. It pumped out narratives talking about obligatory life in a pure Islamic caliphate and offered women so-called rights and a place of value in society. And it's hard to imagine a group like ISIS talking about women's rights, but this was the language they used to draw some women to the group. They offered women practical roles, including an education or healthcare provision. It arranged marriages for those who had come if they were single. Many women stayed home and became mothers to cubs with the idea of raising the next generation of jihadists. Others took up more active roles. They recruited new members. They supported husbands who fought on the front lines or policed other women themselves. In some cases, they facilitated, supported, or directly conducted violence. Every case has to be analyzed uniquely and individually. Everyone had a different combination of push and pull factors that led to their joining ISIS, and everyone had diverse roles and levels of participation once they became affiliated with the group. This is also one of the reasons it's so difficult to deal with this concern today. Should they be able to return to our societies? Governments around the world are responding differently. Some, like Kosovo, Germany, Russia, and Tajikistan, have returned some minors and even fewer women. Others, such as the UK and many other Western countries, have demonstrated they have little interest in having them back. Indonesia has a de-radicalization program in place already and has been active in bringing their citizens home and placing them in these programs, so some may potentially even reintegrate back into society one day. I argue yes, these women and their children should be brought back to their home countries, and I'm going to tell you why. And these reasons have to do with security, legal, and ethical considerations. First, the future status of these persons, if they remain in Syria, is uncertain. Local SDF forces are unlikely to hold them forever, and there's a potential for them to be let free, not monitored, and potentially become a future security concern. Iraq has been putting thousands of people on trials and are currently overwhelmed with cases. There are also a number of serious concerns that have come up in Iraq, such as flawed or swift trials, a lack of evidence and convictions, and severe human rights violations, including torture in prison. Children as young as 9 can currently be held criminally responsible for terrorism-related charges. These current approaches don't generally provide real justice for the victims of ISIS or lend to long-term recovery and reconciliation in the region. In fact, these scenarios are likely to create more problems than they solve. Second, these women have the potential to further radicalize or to radicalize others, including their children, if they are not adequately managed. This is something that's rarely considered, but is a serious concern for the longevity of the group and its ideology. Some of these women may also regret their decision to join the group and will want to leave them behind. And we should support their disengagement and de-radicalization as appropriate. Third, our citizens in Syria and Iraq, many of which radicalized here in our home countries and not over there, also place additional strain on local resources that are already overstretched and overburdened. This negatively impacts the ability of these countries and populations to recover from this period of conflict. Leaving them there as a burden on local populations is simply unethical and, most importantly, does not directly address the problem. Finally, we have to consider the future of these children. In our report, we demonstrated at least 4,640 foreign minors had to be accounted for in Syria and Iraq. We now know that due to births over there, this number is over 8,000. At least 566 were born there from one Western European parent alone, and now may have a right to citizenship. We believe thousands more were born to foreign parents there, but data on this topic is still hard to come by and confirm. These children are largely victims of their parents' choices. And for some, the only community they've ever known is that within ISIS. Some have become child brides and child soldiers against their will. Others have been orphaned and abandoned in the region, and some have even become stateless. Many have died in the region, and most of them have been traumatized to differing extents. Particularly in the West, we have the means to best manage these populations at home. We have strong legal and judicial systems, detention centers, and police and intelligence forces which can monitor adults who may pose a concern or prosecute and incarcerate those that have committed crimes abroad. A growing number of countries have de-radicalization programs in place, and diverse partners can work together to create tailored programs for each person as appropriate. Similar to those who go to jail for a crime, we should focus on the prosecution, the rehabilitation, and even the potential reintegration of some of these persons as appropriate. For children, de-radicalization and reintegration can be tailored to their specific needs. At home, they have access to social, psychological, and family care and support that they lacked in Syria and Iraq. They can go to normal schools and learn about science and math, not how to hate and cause harm to others. They can forge new identities in our societies and leave the ones that ISIS tried to shape for them behind. These children are our citizens, and their welfare is our responsibility. They require intense support, rehabilitation, and reintegration, or they do risk becoming the next generation of radicals or facing other dark futures. They also place an additional burden on local resources, including on Syrian and Iraqi children who also desperately require rehabilitation and other support, which is already too rare. We want these children who have experienced what no other child should go through to have a bright future. We have the ability to give them that if we commit ourselves to it. These approaches are not easy, nor are they guaranteed to be 100% successful. They are long-term and they're resource-intensive. We recognize this. But I believe that they are the best shot we have at addressing these concerns from violent extremists today and going forward. This brings me to my final point. How do we prevent this from happening again in the future? In my book, A Woman's Place, U.S. Counterterrorism Since 9/11, I argue that women have been viewed in flawed and limited ways as actors who can counter terrorism and violent extremism. Many governments around the world have not been effective at recognizing, supporting, and engaging women as diverse actors who can, and already do, contribute to security in a variety of ways. However, this is short-sighted and it's problematic. And in the book, I highlight cases of women's participation and leadership in all aspects of security around the world and highlight the diverse benefits that this can bring. Their leadership, their participation, and consideration in security practices and responses must be supported in our efforts, both at home and abroad. And this can positively impact the concerns we face today and our responses to them. This can happen in three primary areas. First, as women who are community influencers and leaders, or who work with diverse community organizations at the local level, preventing violent extremism from taking root in the first place, or countering violent extremism where it already is present. They can challenge the narratives and the recruitment efforts of terror groups, for example, challenging religious or ideological narratives the groups may put out. They can rebuild communities and help them recover after violence. They can direct people to more socially constructive ways of expressing their grievances, starting a political campaign or a petition rather than joining an extremist group, for example. Second are women who work in the promotion of human and women's rights and more democratic and fair societies that can be more resilient to appeals by terrorist groups. Terrorist groups exploit grievances, and lessening the number of preventable grievances present in a society can help reduce the number of persons susceptible to their appeals. Women's inclusion and consultation can inform the policies and the practices and the legal responses that reflect the needs and concerns of our whole population. They can highlight their own security concerns and the impacts that security measures may have on their families, on their communities, and ensure that they do not negatively or disproportionately impact women or other populations, such as minority groups, when they're implemented. Third, women are active in security practices themselves. From Yemen to Iraq, Brazil to Indonesia, and in almost every society around the world, women have, to differing extents, been active in security institutions, such as police, intelligence, military and defense, or in international peacekeeping forces. They develop and implement security policies and practices around the world. They work with police as local communities. They train and support men and women in foreign security forces. They are active in the military and even active on the front lines of combat, as we saw with YPJ and Peshmerga forces against ISIS, or in other conflicts like Afghanistan, where women from Canada, New Zealand, and other NATO partners took part in combat operations. They help support persons who have dealt with traumas and injuries, including sexual and gender-based violence in conflict zones. Yet women's roles in security are still viewed as some of the most contentious around the world. Some states believe women don't have a place in security practices and do not support their equal participation, but we need to push back on such policies. We must identify barriers to women's entry into these forces and ensure that we support women's full and equal participation in all aspects of security in our societies. While being more conscious of women as actors in violent extremist groups and terrorist groups, and supporting their diverse roles in security practices, end terrorism and other political violence, is it a silver bullet solution? No, it's not. But it will ensure that when we develop and carry out responses to violent extremism and terrorism, women aren't a second thought. This means that women are considered as also having the potential to radicalize, which allows us to work harder and more effectively to prevent them from joining these groups in the first place. It also allows us to better manage those who have already joined and supported violent extremist groups and prosecute, rehabilitate, and reintegrate them into society as appropriate. This is particularly important as we continue to face diverse concerns from jihadist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda today, or increasing numbers of far-right violent extremist groups, as we've seen in New Zealand, Canada, Norway, and the US, amongst others. It also helps us to more readily consider and support women as key actors who lead, design, and participate in all aspects of security in our societies. This means more inclusive, holistic, and thoughtful responses to some of the biggest security concerns of our day, including radicalization and terrorism. And for me, that's an idea worth spreading. Thank you very much.